Can you close the end of the room? Okay, Patty, we're gonna start. Good evening, this is a regular meeting of the planning board of the village of Dobbs Ferry on Thursday evening, November 1. We have 5 items on our agenda. A couple other things I would mention at this point. One is that you'll see there's 2 new names on the board in front of you. We've asked the 2 members, the chair and the vice chair of the AHRB, to join us tonight as part of our effort to work more closely together on those applications where going back and forth is one way to do it, but it helps to get input from everybody as we go through these. So I'm delighted. We had a joint meeting, a work session with them a couple of weeks ago, and I'm delighted that 2 of them are here tonight for the first item on our agenda, which will be 100 Main Street. But before we get to that, a couple things. Javier de la Garza, board member vice, is not with us tonight. We did have several pieces of correspondence. We have a letter from Stephen Oakes, who's the historic site manager for the Aqueduct Park, and that area. We have a letter from Stephen Tilley and Elizabeth Martin, and we had another letter from Ellen Fronick regarding one of the applications, and we acknowledged receipt of those, and the board members have been made aware of those. The first item on our agenda tonight is to adopt the minutes of the meeting of September 6th. Does anybody have any comments? I reviewed it. I have no comments. I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes. Is there a second? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. One item that was on our agenda that was overlooked, 11 overlooked, will be continued at the next meeting. It isn't on the agenda, but they will be at our next meeting. They asked to be continued. The second item on our agenda is 100 Main Street. We have requested that Mr. Steinschneider, the representative of the applicant, try to keep this within a half an hour or so as we move along through this process. You see what he knows better than anybody. We've been doing this at both boards for a while, and we're trying to find a way to efficiently reach a conclusion that we I won't say we can support, but hopefully can support and move on to the Board of Trustees. So, Mr. Steinschneider.
I guess this is the batteries. I mean, I don't.
He's going to take care of it. Battery was charged.
So it might be a little shorter than that. I'm unable to get the PowerPoint operating. But I think we can do some basic things. I've got some drawings that I've handed out to you that were kind of a history going through this, and we've also got the SketchUp that we can take a look at. Not sure why this thing is not responding better. At the last meeting,
Present application, right? Need the history. You're just going to present the present application, right?
well, we actually, yeah, we've had a meeting since then. We had a work session with the architectural review board. So at that work session, there were a couple comments made, and there were some ideas that we wanted to investigate further. Luckily, I've made some prints, which you've got, since I can't show them in the PowerPoint. Obviously, the submission is something that you do have. That was what we, put in. And what that does is that shows what we presented to you at the October meeting with a little bit more detail given to it. The first sheet, and actually maybe I can do this for myself. Let's see if we can work that. I don't think so.
Do you not have a PDF or something that, so that?
I have everything in a PowerPoint, so it's.
But are these images also available?
I'd have to figure out why my screen looks the way it does. It's,
You should, because I think the public
well,
would be interested.
I mean, we've got a PowerPoint that we can show, we've got a model, and the drawings were submitted. What's up on the PowerPoint is what, or on the SketchUp, is what we presented to you at the last meeting. There were a number of comments, concerns that were expressed about the way that certain things looked. If you look at your first sheet that's in there, I think what you see on that is a slightly reduced scope in various components, cutting down on the front, where we had the eave up high. We brought this eave down to match this with a dormer in the middle. It doesn't address many of the comments that we heard at the meeting on October 22nd. So this is something that maybe we'll want to discuss further, but I think tonight might be a better use of tonight might be talking about some of the things that came up from the 22nd, to see the extent to which the planning board, and obviously 2 members of the architectural review board, are interested in seeing us pursue an alternative approach. This design is compliant with code, with the exception that we would have to have parking projecting from the bottom of the building by 4.5 feet towards the aqueduct. I'm not sure that I know I don't agree with that interpretation, because I do believe that it constitutes the village's definition of enclosure. And obviously, one of the things that the planning board made a primary concern was accommodating parking on site. I know there's different opinions on the board about that, but we worked to find a way of having 8 parking spaces on the site. What that necessitated was the cars sticking out. There was concern expressed by the planning board about the visibility of those cars from the aqueduct. And what we did is we provided the equivalent of a fence, horizontal fence, if you will, in the form of the trellis, so that you block the view looking down from there. We've also proposed on the plans extensive landscaping augmenting what's along the aqueduct. But this design starts with the premise of having that parking level. And as it was clear at the October 22nd meeting, if you have a base of parking, you are raising the building up a story. If you raise the building up a story, even if you're compliant with code, you still have a fairly large block of a structure. I've made efforts to break that down to varying degrees or opinions of success. We've looked at different ideas on this, for example, different roof lines and things like that. We had, as we said to the planning board, I don't think we got the chance to really make it clear to the architectural review board. We had intended to work in concept of massing on this from a planning standpoint until such time we got that nailed down, and then approach it from an architectural standpoint. The planning board asked us at the September meeting to flesh it out a bit, so we did. And we added some detail to it and those things, but we have said from the beginning, this is not a finished product, this is not worked out with details to the extent that we would be comfortable. It's really difficult to do that if you're not sure where you're going with the massing. So one of the comments that came up at the October 22nd meeting was what would happen if you eliminated the level of parking or reduced the parking. First thing we found is that if we reduce the parking, say from 8 spaces to 4 spaces, we don't really accomplish that much from a massing standpoint. The depth that you need underneath for parking is basically 18 feet for the spaces, 24 feet for the drive area. If you eliminate the 18 feet, 4.5 of which is poking out at the end, what you're basically getting is use of 13 feet on the ground which is not sufficient to have it be, well, that eliminates a story above or something like that. So if you're gonna go to the idea of reducing massing by reducing parking, the real way to go, I think, is that you would eliminate the parking and you drop the whole thing down. In the packets that I gave you are, and I'll try and find, I know I got those, but I don't know exactly. Well, you see what I'm looking at. It's a little bit, I don't know why the computer is doing its relationship with this the way that it is. It's actually anything I click on right now, it's deleting or moving. Okay. So this month, what we're talking about, the only problem here is that we're not gonna be in order, which is gonna make it very difficult. What I'll do is I'll go to the two that we looked at as alternatives. What we did is we looked at one which would have a 4 residential unit fourplex, so to speak, 2 on each floor, 3 entrance doors facing Elm Street. The middle door goes up to the 2 apartments on the 2nd floor. The other 2 doors are the entrances to those 2 units. On the ground floor, each apartment has 2 bedrooms in the back. The area where you see the 3 double hung windows, that's actually recessed back in. There's a kind of depth in that, so that you don't have the feeling of your windows right out on the sidewalk. And again, we're certainly not suggesting that this is worked out, which is one of the reasons we haven't gone further with any detail. But the idea is what we're trying to ask about. If you eliminate parking and you have the 4 units configured in this, and which enables you to have the height that you need to actually have the roof. Because one of the things we talked about with the other design, with the parking underneath, you don't have sufficient height left. When the village changed its code, it changed 3 conditions, any one of which I think might have done the job. You put all 3 together and it's fairly limiting. Reducing it from 50 feet to 40 feet, changing where you're measuring from, no longer the grade plane, and then measuring to the highest point of the roof instead of to a midpoint of the pitched roof. It really, this is a 32-foot high building, which is, you can build taller than that in single-family zones, and yet in downtown, it's you're very limited. So this was one of 2 ideas that we came up with. The other was, as Alan might enjoy, it's probably not where Alan wants it to be, but at least it was inspired by what Alan had asked for, was what if we just did 3 townhouse type structures with 3 entrances coming in. This remains the entrance to the 2 units in this building. That doesn't really change. So here you'd have a total of 5 units. The requirement here is that you'd need 8 parking spaces that you don't have on site, so you'd be looking for a combination of the pileups and the curbside. So I don't know, most of what I was planning to show you, probably you don't mind missing, which was to take you through the evolution of how we got to where we're at.
Some of us have lived through that, so.
Yeah, myself included.
Yes.
So actually, this is new, which was if we stayed with where we were at the last meeting, a couple of changes that we could do that I think bring it closer. Again, we're still not really at an architectural point yet, but the idea of having this same roof form on this so that this whole building feels like it's one structure, which I think as an individual building, I think that works fairly well. The idea of this bridge structure that's between the 2, bringing that eave down so it meets the dropped eave on the portion that's facing the aqueduct. And then we also, I don't have the elevation of it, but how'd you do that? Okay, well, I found a way to open it. Oh, I'm up to that. Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is an evolution from what we had submitted, anticipating keeping the parking on the ground floor. The other two are really a question to this board of whether you think that's something that we should pursue further.
Well, I can only speak for myself. I've been very strongly committed to the idea of parking on site, as you know.
Yeah.
This and other projects. But if we're gonna have a project here, it seems to me that it makes it a project that is undesirable in many respects. So I think it'll be very interesting to see if, using the vision plan maybe as the basis for that thinking, I think it would be interesting to see you work through with this board and with the Architecture Review Board to see if the project with no parking can be made interesting.
Now, I support that concept, and I'm perfectly willing to work with that. I think there's another board that's engaged in this process. Donna happens to be sitting right here. So, I don't know if it makes sense. We could get into the same kind of dead end that things happen, say at 75, where the Architectural Review Board worked very hard, the Planning Board worked very hard. They came up with a solution that they felt really worked, and they supported 100%. It was a unanimous recommendation to the Board of Trustees. And then the Board of Trustees says that's not what we want. And the Board of Trustees then worked with the applicant to design something that's very different than either board had wanted to do. And I don't think that's good planning. I don't want to see this go that way. So what I would prefer to do is not have it be something where we work all the way through with something that does not have parking perhaps, and then get to a point where we're asking them to approve something without parking, where I know several members of the Board of Trustees might feel that parking is the #1 concern. Whether members of this board agree or not won't be really the determining factor. So I guess if we can find a way, whether it's engaging with the Board of Trustees on that question, or as I think Dwight was trying to lead us at the last meeting, was, because I misunderstood what Dwight referred to, he referred to the first resolution, where there was a little bit of disagreement on the board between, I think it was Javier and Rob, who had said they had no problem with the height of the extra story, and we had two members that said, I'm in favor of this if we can reduce it by 1 story. So the recommendation that went to the Board of Trustees kind of said, you guys figure out, do you want it this tall or do you want it that tall? Now, unfortunately, the Board of Trustees sent it back to you. And that's when we got the design that was the one that you actually recommended for approval. And the Architectural Review Board took up to the point of having it where they said that they would discontinue further review until such time as the Board of Trustees had made a determination on the application. So, thought I would have that one, but I don't. You don't really need to see it. So, actually, I think it's this. Yeah, this was where we got to on that, which was the, obviously, this had the structure over close to the aqueduct. 2 foot 4 inches away at the clear corner, maybe 4 feet at the other. But that is pre the change in the code. So I guess at this point, one of the things that we need to do is find the method of how you want to proceed if that's it. We develop 2 ideas, one with parking, one without.
Why don't you show us of all of these options in the packet, which, if any, you believe is a successful example of both of those types of building?
Well, I think the one that I thought was very close, which you and other members of the ARB referred to as the 22nd, this is the one that we had gotten fairly close with. We had reduced massing down.
I think you can very easily eliminate that as a possible option because it does not include the 10-foot setback that is now required. So let's look at if there is an option that addresses that and that 1 addresses the parking issue and 2 addresses an option without the parking issue. I think those are maybe the only 2 things we should really be talking about tonight because they're the only ones that are potentially relevant to move forward.
Well, the one that we felt we had gotten to with the parking Whether or not it has the tower to the roof. The tower to the roof is a nice idea. It's not, the program is not contingent upon it. So
Which page number is this?
This is probably the first page.
That does not have the 10-foot setback.
Yes, it does.
That's okay.
But not for the parking.
Not for the parking.
Right. For the building, it does. not
Right.
for the parking.
So this, and when we say we can't build within 10 feet, one of the things we can do within 10 feet of the aqueduct is pave. Another thing we can do within 10 feet of the aqueduct is have retaining walls and fences. So those are things that have not been precluded by the new code. So with those means, we can do things that do give some sense of enclosure. Which is the rule about being able to be closer to 10 feet. Open to interpretation, opinions, but that's something that we could work out. This would be something that we felt could, again, not that it's evolved to the point that we would be saying, please approve this, but with or without the tower, this is where I would go if I was trying to do something that had the parking with the setbacks and height that are currently required. This gives you 8 parking spaces, which is, some people would value very highly. I did have the opportunity to communicate a little bit with Steve today, and one of the things I pointed out is that, Steve Hunter, one of the things I pointed out is my giving away the parking. That's not something I have discussed with Mr. Sutton. I do know that at 66 Main Street and 2 Ashford Avenue, the apartments that have parking are renting for significantly more than the apartments that don't have parking, to a surprising number, to, effectively $1,000 an apartment per month. So, that's something that, I don't think that's important enough to have be the determining factor. I just think it's something that, we can't just be cavalier about it. So in answer to Michael's question, if I was proposing a direction to go with parking, if the other one's truly off the table, which I'm not sure it should be, it would be to go with this. The other one, I understand.
Does this differ from what we looked at
Yes.
last week?
Yes,
That's the model.
right. It actually, do you see the model? Yeah.
That's from last week.
So this one had a cornice that came across. This mast was up high. So those, and the dormers on the aqueduct side were larger than what we have in this. So with
But
this,
aside from those sort of small points, is there any significant difference in the massing of this?
No, it's
Yeah,
2 stories.
Dimensionally in what we're seeing.
No, it's 2 stories above parking. It basically is the footprint that you're permitted, 2 stories above
So
parking.
it's the same building.
Same building with different articulation of massing, which in my opinion, works better than what we showed in the model. If I were, I'm not in a.
When you refer to the articulation of masses, you say is the facade moves, is like the surface of the facade changes, not an articulation of masses.
Oh, well, this is quite different. I mean, if you have the eave up here coming across.
Right, no, my question is, if this is the surface, right? This surface, facade, what's the difference
In depth, to be determined.
what, 6 inches? 8 inches?
The minimum it could be is a foot.
If it's
The-
not-
the-
if
What we
that's
did in the
not
model is a
beyond
foot. But
Yeah, maybe that's
And another
generous.
question is, how this tower surface, I'm just calling the surface, the elevation.
Right.
Is it changed from what was there?
No, that tower is in the same position.
Same position.
Same position, you've got a 10-foot space.
So it's the same what we're looking there?
Correct.
So it's the same massing, basically?
After the workshop, one of the things I took away from it was that it was basically a massive block that most people thought was too large a program for the site. I mean, there were a few dissidents, definitely, but
Just refer to them as.
it seems like it's the same.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing, I'm just trying to
Okay,
understand.
there have been so many discussions with the architectural review board members that have pivoted on such a smaller scaled element than what we're talking about here. I feel awkward in trying to suggest that having completely changed where the eave is on this mass and the potential that this sets back further in, say about 4 or 5 feet, that
Oh,
is
that's
not,
It's not 6 inches, that's what I'm saying.
I never got the end of it. Michael commented that, that was, 6 inches was somehow, an exaggeration or something. What I said was not yet determined. So if we wanted this to be, say, a foot back, so it's more like Main Street, where you've got these buildings that are very close to the front facade, one of the things we have in our code, in fact, is encouraging that. The alternative is this could set back, say, 4 feet, which would give a very different read in the way this looked. One of the things I liked about the scheme that was recommended for approval by the planning board in May of 2016 was when you looked up Elm Street, this massing was about maybe 8 feet forward of the horizontal piece. So when you look, you clearly saw this form as a distinct, separate form in the massing.
So can I say that to Michael's point? So if Michael's after 2 benchmarks, one with parking and one without, right? So this is a one with at the moment.
Right.
Well, what is the one, if you had to pick one, understanding it's not fully developed, what is the one that's
Well,
closest to the no
developed less-
on-street parking?
Right, developed less than
Is it the townhouse one, or?
I would love your input on those. I don't know which one of those is a better direction. I mean, this obviously has one fewer unit. We've tried to do something with the way this reads as part of this, but yet there are different things that are happening. The extent to, even surface materials and, those are all things that can be talked about. This could be an incredibly modern building, if that was the direction that people wanted to go. I perceive so much of the comment that has been given on what's happening in downtown to favor the alternative, which is a kind of second building background that looks like it fades in, as opposed to something that's trying to be articulate itself as independent. But this, as again mentioned, following from what Alan's suggestion was, even to the point that if somebody said, well, I don't know, making these two the same, why don't you just raise this one up with a couple of steps like you have there, bring this line up to there, those are things we could talk about.
Right, okay, but to Michael's point though,
Yeah,
and then Michael, I'll give it back to you, these would be then the two, these are like the 2 benchmarks then, right?
but I'm-
Presumably, that presumably get explored and that we,
but I also wouldn't,
right,
I think so.
Is that what you're after?
Yeah, really what I'm trying to do is,
hone down.
yeah, we have to start looking at something real, and those should depart from a place that you think is most successful in the 2 options, because obviously you've looked at this a lot more than we have. So if we can avoid looking at options that are from 2 years ago, or that, don't meet the 10-foot setback, or, and it just start from there and have an intelligent conversation about.
right, that's fine.
About those 2 possibilities. And
Yeah,
then we
no.
can talk about all the other.
The purpose for
components about-
providing that other, though, is that there was some perception that there had not been an evolution throughout the process. There's been a significant one. So this is the other alternative of what to do. I'm not at a point prepared to say that this would not be superior to the townhouses. I'm not sure which one works better in terms of how it relates to the street, and this being Elm Street, but also being Main Street. It's obviously, it's one of the few buildings that you've got. 78 was the other, obviously 75 is a different issue because that was existing, but when you're on a corner, you've got that different read. You've got the frontal quality towards Main Street. What I don't like is having where, okay, here's the Main Street facade and this looks like it's the side. So, this makes an effort to be frontal to Elm Street, have a compatible relationship in the massing and the styles and the way lines can continue. And that could be reinforced more if there was a feeling that there would be an advantage to that. I don't think it would be better, for example, to have the windows in this be different unto themselves, but I also don't think it would be better if they carried this line of this building. I think it wants to be different.
Hey Patty, maybe you can help me understand something. So if we asked you to design a 100% compliant with code solution here, every parking space on site, 9 parking spaces on site, no parking intruding into the 10-foot setback, and the new height restrictions, what can you build on this site?
You wouldn't be able to do that. You can't put 9 parking spaces on the site. And in fact, you can't put 8 parking spaces on the site unless Mr. Manley felt that because it's a smaller kind of parking lot, there would be a justification for relaxing the 24 feet between the aisles of parking. If that was 20 feet, then you'd be able to have it comply. And that design that we showed, the only way that that does not comply, the top drawing there, the only way that that does not comply is that those parking spaces are poking out underneath.
But you don't meet the height. I mean, you also said that if you only had 4 parking spaces on there, you couldn't.
No, we have 8
make the
parking
height.
spaces.
So-
That design,
I'm not saying it doesn't help to eliminate half the parking space.
Right.
You have to
Right.
eliminate all of
Right.
them, or you.
Right. So, I mean, doesn't that say something to you, that if you can't have the parking, or you can't meet the height, you can't make a compliant building here?
That's something that someone could say. I'm not going to say that. I don't agree with that. I think that the fact that
It is
it's.
the code, though. I mean,
Well, that's a position that the village can take, and that's something that would then be, probably figured out by someone else other than myself. The village has reviewed this project very carefully, several times. During the course of that process, it has changed the laws that pertain to that. It could be argued that that was intentional for this project. If you go back and you listen to the tapes of the discussions of the land use committee, or not land use committee, but the citizens task force, that this was a direct point of conversation in those meetings. So,
Before, can I interrupt?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, so I guess to get to Steve's point though, and I'm not advocating this, because this person is not what I want to see, but you could theoretically, the amount of off-street parking is driven by the number of units and bedrooms, right?
correct.
So you could theoretically build, this is not what I like doing, but you could theoretically back into the size of the building based on how many off-street parking spaces.
Well, right now, you've got 2 units with 4 bedrooms in the front building. That requires 3 parking spaces now.
I thought that part of your argument was that you don't have to provide parking for existing.
I did make that argument, and it was overruled.
You need to maintain what's existing. So if he has 3 spaces for the existing building, he has to maintain those 3. If he had no spaces for the existing building, he would not have to maintain any.
Okay, so those
just the
3,
new.
and then in order to build 1 unit on this, I mean, like.
You need more than 1 parking space.
Huh?
You need more than 1 parking space, and you can fit 4 parking spaces on the site, without projecting into the, rear yard,
So it's not buildable.
basically.
I agree with Steve and Alan about the existing heights, and I like the massing of this one best. I think that the other one seemed too big for the street. And I know that you just said that it's not buildable at a smaller scale, but if you could get rid of like part of the first floor and put the parking lot there and just have 1 layer of apartments above, and then like some of the 2 in the front, like is that not
That's
doable?
No, it's
No?
not. You need 43 feet of depth going from one side to the other of the parcel to have 4 parking spaces. So if you put one of the things, again, that's difficult, I almost daily have to go remind myself how small this lot is. When you actually walk into that backyard, you realize that it doesn't have that additional space. So if you do 43 feet coming back here, you basically get to the front of the existing garage. So you would take this up for your parking. So, and that gets you 4 spaces. So you wouldn't be able to have parking for these units if you did that.
Right, I mean, couldn't you, like, the one that had the kind of terracey thing in the back that still maintained the 10-foot setback, could you not extend the parking like all the way under? Like,
What,
so not,
you pay, in other words, that's what I'm talking about with if the building inspector determined that for, you know, small private parking lots, 60 feet was sufficient. We would then be able to fit the 8 parking spaces under this building, fully compliant. The code has a section that says a parking space is 18 feet long, and the aisle between them is 24 feet. So if you take the 24 feet and the 18 and the 18 to get 8 spaces, you basically go from this line to 4.5 feet past that line. So you're 4.5 feet into the new setback to the aqueduct.
I think that this is a public hearing, and I want to leave some time for the public to comment on not necessarily this, but on the project as it's evolved. But I think we owe you some specific direction on what we, as joint boards, would like to see you do before you appear before either of the boards.
Which, that's fine, whatever you want.
And I guess to that point, I just want to say, I personally agree with the chairman's opening statement that I'm interested in schemes that have no off-street parking. But I also appreciate the desire to not run down a blind dead end.
Right.
That's really what it is. So I guess my question is, where in this process are we able to get a reading from, because it's sort of out of sequence, I guess, I don't know. I mean, well, what's our process for finding out whether the Board of Trustees will even entertain? If they want to entertain a scheme where we don't meet it, then we're wasting everyone's time, the public's, ours, and the applicants. If we think that there's a possibility that they might see a better project, and that's obviously my belief, as you know, if there was no off-street parking required, is that something that they're going to seriously entertain, or is that so out of line? So how do we get to that read?
Well, what's your read? I think we need to know if this is something you would want to see. If this is like, no way, then
Yeah, so
why
we
go
can
there?
poll this board
What do you
right
think?
now
Yeah.
and figure out, or how many of us would entertain a site with no off-street parking? I'm ready to do that.
Like this, with 4 units, or 3.
Yeah, 3 or 4 units.
I would support it.
Thumbs down.
I would support looking at it further.
It's 3 to 2.
So
What about,
now,
how does the ARB feel about it, too?
I'm sure.
I would just like to know, how does the ARB members feel about that, too? Not that they have an issue about parking, but how do they see the architectural aspects of that type of mass building?
If we don't have to deal with parking,
You don't?
speaking by, what I, for myself, is obviously you reduce the massing, it's much easier to deal with the site. And remember, the site is not only Main Street and Elm, it's also the aqueduct. And the aqueduct is part of the narrative of what we're trying to do here, and how this scheme relates to the privileged location that you have. It's a privileged location in town. It's a corner, both sides corner. It's Elm and, Main and Elm, and Elm and the aqueduct is visible. And if we don't have parking, I think we'll benefit. But there is an issue of parking.
Yeah, sorry, I'm slightly lengthier answer than everyone. I was hoping that we would see a possibility of less mass and less parking. So I find the sort of either or extreme case to be, I find neither one of them to be satisfying. I think that having no parking in a building that really should have 9 spaces is a fairly aggressive approach. I sympathize with the point, which is what we want is a good building, and if that means sacrificing some parking, I think that's okay. And I think, I'd be willing to entertain that, but none is a bit.
Yeah, you gotta stay in your pew. ARB, you're not worried about parking. That's not your issue. You're looking at architecture.
But he's sitting at the planning board.
The only reason I'm here
Yeah.
is so that we don't have this back and forth.
Well, I think you just gotta keep in mind that the planning board, at least 3 to 2, would wanna consider that parking, that development without parking, right? Now we gotta understand, would the board of trustees even entertain that? I think that's the next step. From an architectural perspective, ARB doesn't care about parking, that's not your purview. You gotta look at the architecture and whether the massing is too great.
Could I
But in
just say-
fairness to Michael and.
I'm not trying to-
that we've always agreed that there are places where, and the reason we go through the pain and suffering of these joint meetings is because there are places where it's not, you know, the two things overlap around massing. It's hard.
Yeah,
You don't want to
massing is
hand, in fact, I was prepared, quite frankly, to pass on the previous submission to the AHRB, thinking, okay, well, they'll do what they need to do, and then the AHRB really, my sense from the joint meeting was that it was more, that would be handy, putting more on their plate that they necessarily felt confident they'd be able to do. So I think it's important to get a sense from the AHRB whether or not they think they're more likely to be able to work with something that everyone's gonna be happy with. Which is why I appreciate them being here.
In terms of massing, I agree.
In terms of, right, well,
Well, the impact
Just like
we parking has on
common
that.
sensical comment, I don't know any building that benefits from architecture from having a parking.
yeah.
So, there's a parking buildings which are different, you know, not the best buildings in
But
town.
the elephant in the coffee
But,
table, we're advisory and the.
Well, Donna raised her hand, so maybe we should listen to her.
No, it's a question, it's not, thank you. The question, you mentioned something about rentals and the difference in the rentals. Have you spoken to Mr. Sutton about not having parking?
No. I didn't even look at that until after the 22nd.
I just don't know if that would, he might nix it or not, I just.
Well, that's true, we should get that.
Sure, but you know, there are a lot of people whose opinion is gonna matter. It would be a mistake for me to go to Mr. Sutton and have that discussion and have him say, well, are they ready? Would they consider approving it if we don't have parking?
Oh.
And I say, I have no clue. He'd say, well, then why am I gonna give up the parking if that's not what it is? So,
Okay, but then that's our answer.
Right.
Because that is the situation he's in, we're not gonna be able to guarantee that it'll be approved. So
Right.
I think it's a legitimate question to ask him.
right,
Are we, you know, you consider?
right. Well, knowing that there are 3 planning board members who would be willing to consider a project without parking makes it have viability to at least be worth a conversation. So that's what we got tonight. So,
But the board, but I guess the question is, do we have a way of taking the temperature of the board of trustees in a way, in a similar?
I think the developer should do it, and so should us, and we'll talk.
right.
How would that work, Darius? What would happen? Would they actually go to the, directly from here to the BOT?
I think I can do it informally first, and let Patty know if it's something that's even worthwhile, and let you know. Ed and I can, and then report back.
We could also do it like if we ran up against something that wasn't compliant and we had to send to zoning, say, okay, you gotta go to zoning, then come back. We could do that because the board of trustees, it grants the waivers for pileups and parking. You could send it back to the board of trustees to see what their feeling was about pileup, how many they would grant, and then come back here and then explore, fine tuning the project.
I mean, until April, 4 parking spaces supported 4 residential units. So, your earlier question about if you did the 4, what could you do? Up until April, you were within 1 parking space of having a 3-unit complex.
So then, to Michael's point, there isn't, we're making ourselves crazy here, but presumably there isn't in between the no parking and the 9 spaces.
If
there is an in-between.
But the in-between.
Because that's what she was asking, but it's not, you made it sound.
It's not but that's an in-between that's not something that is within this board or this applicant to make a determination. If the village has just adopted a change in its zoning ordinance, it said, parking that was one space per apartment is not sufficient. And what we need to do, for example, right now, 75 Main Street, which has 18 parking spaces, would now require 27 parking spaces. Same project. 78, I don't actually know their mix of bedrooms, but my guess is they would need to have 14 parking spaces. So we're now dealing with that new factor, which similar to the height, where you've got these there's a variety of different things you can adjust. When you adjust all of them, you know, it's a very heavy change.
Well, excuse me, Patty, but whether you have 6 or 9 spots, don't you still need a variance because you don't have space for?
Well, no, the village did not remove pileups nor curbside parking from being allowed to be included. So both of those are there. The board of trustees, I mean, just to take Rob's point basically and go one step further. If, let's say the architectural review board and the planning board thought this was the best thing since sliced bread, as long as it doesn't have parking and it's the smaller structure. We do not have a non-compliant project at that point. What we have is a project that requires the consideration by the Board of Trustees to accommodate the parking in the form of a combination of pileups and curbside parking. So let's say, they say we're gonna count the 4 spaces that are on Elm Street as.
No, I get the concept. Do you agree with that position?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what you,
Yeah.
I mean, to your question about what is as of right, as of right includes the option to have pileups and on-site parking.
The answer I gave was having the parking on site. You know, if I have to have the parking on site, if the planning board said, we're not going to approve this unless you've got the parking on site, we have compliance with 4. But again, if you guys said, look, we think the parking is really that important, we now understand that when you look at the views from, you know, here's the view you get of the aqueduct from 100 Main Street. This is what we're talking about. That's what the reality of the view is. If we look at the view of the property from the aqueduct, this is the reality. Now, this is this time of year. In another 2 months, you're gonna see the garage because you'll lose the leaves. But this perception, as Ayer kind of eloquently put it, that it's this, you know, this is not facing onto the waterfront. This is not somehow a.
Yeah, but to be fair to the argument is that I know that there are efforts to improve the aqueduct experience and
Sure.
and it's a landmark and
Yeah.
it's a linear park that can benefit from the criteria of
I agree.
buildings about the aqueduct and
Steve?
it's not the waterfront, but it's a privilege.
We have nice big doors that we wanted to have lots of glass facing outwards. So we're not saying ignore it at all. But it's also, the reality is a little
The
different.
reality is that we can improve the relationship.
Right.
Yeah, but, you know, I'd like to remind everybody, we're representing citizens of Dobbs Ferry, I believe these boards, both architectural and, so, you know, I'd love to hear from the.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
We are, we're gonna.
This is a public hearing, and I just think, I thought that the board.
Can I just add one thing?
Should get ourselves organized at least so that we know where we're going, and so that the public knows where the outcome of this meeting is.
I think there's one more variable though. We talked about compliant parking and no parking. The other is a smaller building, a less massive building. And so that variable needs to be kept very much in our minds as we go forward. Even if you have a solution that has no parking, it does not mean that the building has to be as big as it is. It can reduce the number of spaces that require pilot by having a smaller building. Which brings to mind, I think most of us got a tour of the barn building and saw what terrible shape it's in. But on the other hand, it's a pre-existing non-conforming use and it therefore not compliant. And therefore, it can encroach in the 10-foot setback. It does not have to meet that requirement. So if it was possible to do renovations to it, which would be almost like new construction at the end, given what you see in there, you could build into that building and not have to meet the 10-foot setback. You can build it as it is, it's on its footprint. So you could have a small building, maybe that would accommodate 1 or 2 units, some parking in between the existing building. And so the main thing I want to say, I'm not sure the feasibility of renovating that structure is I mean, it is almost a total rebuild when you get to it. But isn't that something that should be considered as a less difficult development? Because the other part that I always think about is this construction affects the existing tenants and commercial space that's in the front building that's there. So actually doing a renovation if it's possible, and I'm not saying I'm an expert that it is, of just the barn, which a lot of people wanted to save in the first place. Would not that be less intrusive on the people already occupying the site and achieve something that people have talked about, how it fits in with the character of the aqueduct? So the question of feasibility is what I would put out there. So I would say, yes, and that would be it. I would just assume you renovate it, have some parking and maybe some space where there's a little lawn area.
Without building anything else?
Nothing in between, that's it. So I'm just saying, is that a project that is feasible? And that's really looking at the barn and saying, could we, and part of me thinks that has to be less expensive than some of what we're talking about. I just, even though that is a total gut job, you know, it's just, it's still, it takes advantage of the intruding into the 10-foot setback. It's pre-existing. People have wanted it to be saved, so I don't think we get a lot of objection to that. And then you don't have a large construction project, you don't have a large bulk massive building, you have just a rather modest, smaller project that you fit into. So I don't know that it's feasible, but I would say that to a smaller project, along with no parking and plenty of parking, a smaller project is also variable. And when you go to the root of a smaller project, could something be done with that barn? That would be the chips I would put into the hopper to try to decide what to do.
Thank you, Dwayne. Sort of along those lines.
It's interesting. Darius, is this something I can ask a question about?
It's free country.
In 2008, there was an architect who was trying to do that, and he went fairly far with the project before this board, and I don't know, back then, I don't think he did go before the AHRB, or the ARB then. Where he got hung up was when the village determined that he would have to get a variance for that structure to do it. He was not willing to take that step on, so we were asked to do that. So we went to the zoning board specifically to get a variance to be permitted to renovate that existing building into 2 townhouses. So it would be, you know, rebuilding a number of things. I mean, in fairness too, he was doing that. He was also putting another story on the front. So the idea was the front building, which right now is 2 duplexes, was gonna turn out to be, I think, 6 apartments, 2 on each floor, and then that would be the additional. That was denied by the zoning board on the basis that the building had been, it was a kind of mixed decision. They said you can't do that, but since the village had already issued a condemnation and said that the building had to be taken down, the zoning board also said, but you don't have to do that either. If you come in, if you make certain repairs to the building and you use it for storage, you're allowed to keep the building. So if, you know, I'm assuming.
Is that a question?
Yes. Here's the question mark. So is it viable to do that? Is enough time?
We mentioned it the other day about that, so
Yeah.
we haven't seen that. So what was that, from 1988 you said?
2008.
2008. I'll get to see that. I don't recall
The
I think
height
it
of
was before your time.
the height of the building on
High
Broadway
school
would be
then?
very tall, right? Like, if you were adding an additional story on top of the building that's pre-existing?
Well, I'm not throwing that into this mix.
Oh,
I
it's
think
just
if
on
I
the barn
suggested
part.
that, it would not be, moving in the right direction, as Michael put it in the last meeting. Yeah, I'm not suggesting that we would have, for one thing, back then, the zoning permitted 4 stories and 50 feet.
Right.
Now it's 40 feet and 3 stories, so you've got a 3-story structure, that's 40 feet tall, 39 feet tall, so you'd be tough to get a variance to do it, although the Board of Trustees did leave it open that if they found it to be of merit for some reason, that they can grant 4 stories and I think 45 feet. So, you know, you actually could probably do it, but I don't see that being the temperament that follows from this discussion.
All right, could we move along? I think would be helpful, regardless of looking at many of the options, about the parking. And I think it's important if the Board of Trustees is gonna be the one to finally determine that, to understand how how that would be received before we start going down several perhaps blind alleys. And Donna or Darius, if somehow that could be determined to some degree of certainty, I think that'd be very helpful for the applicant and for us as we look at these things, because it's,
Yeah.
to spend a lot of time and perhaps money on this and find that it was just a blind hole would be unfortunate for everybody concerned, so. I would like to move on to a short public hearing do you have any sense of what you're expected to do?
Well, first thing I gotta find what happened to the presentation that I was gonna make. And, because Ed has made it clear that he wants me to be providing the copies of those, for the record. So I'll do that, but, past that, I don't think there's anything that I should do right now from a design standpoint. I think it really is to, maybe if the board has feelings about either of the two that don't have parking, if they wanted me to pursue one of those further, I would.
I think you should wait,
I think
personally,
you should
until we get a reading.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I mean,
So you're not
So the
wasting-
next thing is to find out the temperature of the Board of Trustees
Right, on the
to
plan.
accept a smaller massed structure, specifically on the benefit that that would provide in the smaller massing by giving up the parking.
Right.
Okay, all right, if it's agreeable to the people on the dais here, I would like to move to the public hearing. This is a public hearing. I know most of you that are here on this issue have been here before, and we understand where you are on this, but it is your right to come up and say something, but I would appreciate comments. Be brief. Yes, Peggy?
I'll make it brief. None of you actually live in our neighborhood where this building is proposed and where the other two new buildings have been built. So you're not aware of some of the unpleasant things that we've had to cope with. One is the under the building garage. They're not underground, they're under the building and they're open all around, almost all around, not completely. So when it's dark out, used to be, we'd look over at the river and we might see a ship or something on the river. And you look into people's apartments, you might see a dim light or a lamp or something. But now, when you look out our windows at night, or we're sitting on the porch and we look out at night, we're invaded with this horrific halogen light that just pours out from both the new buildings, and it's being proposed with this one. Now, if you have to have the parking underground, you should find some way to close it in and have a door that would close. It's very unpleasant. Now, there's also a zillion studies have been done that show that light coming into your bedroom at night will give you breast cancer. You can look that up on the internet if you don't believe me, and I'm sure you don't. But it changes the hormones in your body. So we have too much light as a result of parking garages under the buildings, and you should do something to deal with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Bruce?
Bruce Richards, 153 Main. I mean, this whole process for the last 2 years, it seems like, I mean, I feel like I'm watching one of Cinderella's sisters trying to fit into the shoe. And we keep trying, you know, it's just too big. And the other thing is, please don't give any more pilots. The situation is, just a reality check. It's not code, it's reality. I have a single family on both sides of me. In those single family homes now are Mercy College students. I have the soccer team on one thing and the lacrosse team on, anyway, 9 cars in a single family home. It may be zoned for 1.2 cars, whatever. But the reality is, all of a sudden you've got these apartments, rents are high. So now you're gonna have multiple people coming into these apartments, all with cars. They're not kids, they're, you know, and I like my neighbors. I'm not against the neighbors, but there's a reality. So if you start giving give up, okay, 9 parking, not a problem. I've got 9 cars at 81 Cedar. I can fill up 10% of the new parking lot with my one neighbor. So you can't keep building parking lots to try to offset this pileup thing. So please don't give away the idea that there should be another variance. And the other thing is, on the other 2 buildings, since 66, 68's been brought up and 2 extra have been brought up, even when those were approved, they weren't built as approved.
2 extra was not brought up, so I think.
Excuse me, let's stick with 66, 68 Main then, okay? You know, all of a sudden the mansard's different, and this is different, and that, you know, and all of a sudden, even if you approve what is being proposed, that doesn't necessarily, I mean, I got a feeling the power's gonna show up, no matter what you guys say. So please, hold the line on this stuff. That's all I'm asking. Stick with the code, stick with what's there, and everybody will be much happier, I swear. Thank you.
Thank you. Avis, you wish to?
I'm Mavis Kane, I'm president of the Friends of the Old Croton Aqueduct, and I'm really representing Stephen Oakes, who lives way up north, and otherwise he would be here, but he sent that very long, very thoughtful letter to you, and he put a great deal of effort into it, trying to make you all realize, as you've heard me say over the years, that the National Historic Landmark is your closest neighbor to all of these buildings that front on Main Street. We feel that somehow I have a feeling that people aren't really listening to the importance, we're listening to the facts that of the code setback. That is important, but getting involved with the emotional situation. You know, we have 6,000 people coming a year into the Keeper's House. These are all people who come because they love the aqueduct. They're walking on the aqueduct. They want it to look beautiful. I'm not giving you any facts about the size of the building compared to the parking lots. You all know that. But please keep in mind that this is tremendously important. It's as if it were your neighbor next door where you all live here in Dobbs Ferry. This is your closest neighbor, and it is very important that it be kept as beautiful as it is. You've all heard me fight so long against 66 and 68 abutting the aqueduct, and we did finally win that 10-foot setback. It was 0 setback before that. We put so much effort into it, and now I have a feeling that it's coming up again with variances, and well, maybe we could put the parking lot. We can't go through all this again. We fought the battle for the 10-foot setback parking lot or building or whatever it is. We have to stick to that because of the importance. As Andrea Stewart-Cousin says, the aqueduct is the most important financial asset to every village it passes through. So keep that in mind. People come into the aqueduct, they come to the Keeper's House, they walk, they spend money in the village. They do it because they want it to look great. They don't want a bunch of cars right beside it. So please, keep all that in mind, that you all love the aqueduct, I know. The headline for our new renewal letter is very simple. Show your love for the aqueduct. Renew your membership. But show your love for the aqueduct and keep the parking lots away from the aqueduct, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mavis. Yes.
Hi, Sonia Turjanian, 43 Belden Avenue. Before coming here tonight, I kind of had to familiarize myself with the planning board's purview because I wasn't totally clear on what you're allowed to base your decisions on. So what I saw in the code, it seems like you're not just looking at the height and the width of the project and how it fits onto the site, but certain softer considerations such as the vision plan and our downtown design guidelines. And that's what I wanted to talk about because there's pieces of language in those documents that I think we have to pay close attention to when we're thinking about developing properties in the downtown district. In the vision plan, one of the issues listed in the Old Town section is that, quote, incremental development can lead to the erosion of Old Town's historic character. And erosion is a really difficult thing to think about because it requires you to think about more than just the application that's in front of you, but you have to think about the broader trends that are taking place. So in and of itself, an old barn may just seem like an old barn, but if you remove it, and then you remove an old theater, and then you remove an old Victorian mansion, and then a brick storefront, what you have is just the slow, gradual erosion of the historic character of our downtown. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens window by window, building by building, site plan by site plan. And that's something that our vision plan is warning us against. And in fact, one of the recommendations that's specifically made in the vision plan is, quote, encourage development appropriate for the village character and pleasing to pedestrians. As a lot of you know, I'm the chair of the Historic District Task Force, and we are ramping up an effort to designate a downtown historic district that will border the aqueduct and that will include this site. I decided to take on this huge project because I was sensing a groundswell of community support for preserving the character of our downtown. Groups like the Downtown Improvement Task Force and the Sustainability Task Force have asked to be involved, and many individuals have come to me wanting to be on the Historic District Task Force. So, sensing that this really is the direction our community wants to go in, I've put together a broad coalition of individuals and representatives, and we're doing a big kickoff on November 15th, and we're going to work very quickly to submit an application to the AHRB for the designation of this district in our downtown. So with that in mind, and with the vision plan, the design guidelines, and the AHRB's opinions, I would urge you not to recommend the approval of this kind of site plan with this kind of bulk and massing. The barn aside, this kind of programming on a site of this size, this kind of bulk, this kind of massing is not consistent with the character of our downtown, and that's something that this community, I really believe, wants to preserve. And I think that adaptive reuse is the best approach for this site. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please.
Steve Tilley, 22 Elm Street. I just wanted to go back to the parking issue and how you're talking about managing it, which seems to me problematic, possibly from a procedural point of view, because let's say you get an informal reading and then this goes on for another period of time, and then it comes back as an application with a whole set of other characteristics, and there's a different decision that's made. So that's obviously parking is downtown has, this room has been filled on several occasions, people talking about parking downtown. I'm one of the people who every day parks downtown and searches for parking, kind of at night, during the day. My employees have to leave the office and go out and move cars around, so I have an economic investment in downtown parking. And we all have trouble. I mean, at large portions of the week, our downtown is effectively at capacity. Capacity in parking is 15% vacancy rate. It's considered, for parking structure, considered capacity. And we're, given the searching that I do, we're frequently at that point. So if then there's some kind of public hearing where the notion of a new development after all of the effort that's been made in the last couple of years is being thought about without parking, seems to me, A, that it's a non-starter, it's why waste the time, and B, that the process of playing it out needs to be a public hearing where it's played out with all of the input from the larger community. And so it's trying to do it in a sort of informal hey, what do you think? Just not gonna work. And I think you have to park all the units. I do feasibility studies for a lot of developers, and been doing studies in Yonkers, and close to transit, they're telling me for market, they need to have at least our, the new quotient that we have in our code to have a marketable building. And, that's just the reality of building and marketing buildings in Westchester. It's different in Brooklyn. Brooklyn has some buildings with garages that are, they have space to rent. It's not true here. And for better or for worse, because of the need to get the services, the geography and geology of Westchester, which means, you can travel north and south somewhat, but you can't travel east and west, and there's no real transit. So the second thing is, I would say amen to Dwight's notion. I've had a structural engineer into the building. It's perfectly viable, and more of that building's in better shape than my barn was in when I addressed it. A lot of the full-size 1900 lumber is in great shape. The roof framing is in great shape. So the adaptive reuse of that, it would be an investment, but clearly it would not negatively impact the existing tenants in the same way as the proposed building. It would generate income. Certainly, a lot of us would support it if it needed a use variance at the ZBA. I think it would fly through. It would add, an amenity, and would also keep what I see as a piece of a much larger cultural landscape in place along the aqueduct. So you've heard me on all the other subjects, so I'm not going to go on, and I'm feeling as an applicant in other nights of the week, I feel some obligation to the other people here waiting to have their projects considered. So, but I think that, again, I would offer a suggestion that somehow that the way of dealing with the no parking is, it's problematic, and there'd be a huge response downtown.
Thank you. So, thank you all who spoke tonight.
I just would like to briefly support a lot of the things that Steve was saying about the project, and I really love what, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Sonia said about, the deterioration, the small way that the town changes, that, isn't perceptible. It could be just a window or a door, or a barn, or, a lot of things. And it's really important. It's really, really important, because these things are irreversible. And I think what Dwight said too was very important. And I admit I haven't been following this project all the way along, so I don't really know the extent to which a lot of these things are studied. But surely it is important to really have a viable, real understanding of what's involved in saving the barn, the cost, the viability of it. So you can make a decision. It's sort of like the secret process. You have to, an applicant is required to show the viability of the existing condition, the existing project, and how that can be used and revitalized. And I think that's something that should be requested. I think that's really important.
Thank you all. Thank you now. I would like to move first to thank two representatives from the Architectural Review Board to be with us tonight. It's very helpful. We will talk about how we can work together on this and other projects as we go forward. And I would like to move that we continue the application at
continue the public hearing, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, continue the public hearing. Yeah. Second, all in favor? Thank you very much.
I gave you that, I just ran.
Okay, item 3 on our agenda, 189 Northfield Avenue, continuation. Site plan approval for driveway improvements and new retaining walls.
Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Keith Potensky. I'm the attorney for the applicant, David Loeb and Lauren Went, who are here with me this evening. We also have our architect, Troy Wojciechowski, here as well. I was only recently retained on this matter, so I'd like to take a minute to just hand out the letter that I submitted to the board. I'm not sure everyone got a copy. We also have 4 letters in support that were submitted, which we'd like to hand out as well. As you mentioned, this is an application for regrading an existing driveway and adding a retaining wall and some landscaping. The application requires site plan approval from this board as well as the approval of the village board in connection with improvements within the public right-of-way. At the last meeting, the board closed the public hearing, so what we would ask the board to do tonight is reopen the public hearing for purposes of submitting these materials and hearing our comments. By way of background, the Village of Dobbs Ferry issued a CO for the house in 1994 and again a continued CO in 2017. The certificate of occupancy included the driveway. So in essence, the village has really already approved the existing driveway, and the owner now proposes to make the driveway less steep. The owner's architect has confirmed that there will be ample turning radius in front of the garage such that the owners can back out of the garage and enter the street head first. One of the owners is a physician. It's very important for him being on call to be able to get out. He would never propose anything that he didn't think was feasible. The architect has confirmed that with a turning radius diagram that has been submitted to the village engineer. One of the other concerns I understand the planning board had was visibility into the garage when entering the garage from the street. We confirmed that the 10-foot transitional flat area in front of the garage was sufficient given the average vehicle wheelbase, such that the rear wheel will be on the flat portion heading into the garage, and the driver will be able to see through to the back of the garage before entering the garage. So we're confident that all the safety concerns have been met. It's also important to note that many other homes on the street, on the same side of the street, have steep driveways. What the applicant is looking to do is very similar to the home when you're looking at 189 Northfield Avenue to the left, where there's a similar style retaining wall. They've even retained the same contractor, I believe, who built that out. And they're trying to continue that theme of beautifying the property, making the driveway less steep, and improve the neighborhood as a whole. Moreover, the owner has considered several alternatives, which I think the board asked about, as far as parking down by the street, or proposing a new garage when there's an existing garage, for all the reasons that our architect looked at. Each one of those alternatives was not feasible. Here we have an existing driveway, an existing garage. What makes the most sense here from an impact standpoint, reducing the amount of disturbance, managing stormwater, et cetera, is to reuse the existing structures and improve them. So at this point, we believe that the owners have responded to all the questions from the board and the village engineer meets past the board to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you. We were talking before the meeting briefly about when this was done. You know, the question is, if something new came to us, I think we would look at it quite askance. But it was done in what, 1994?
Correct.
You know, I guess basically I'm partially responsible for.
I'm innocent for this one. Started in '88.
88?
Got a CO in '94, but the permit was issued in '88.
I feel even,
Took a while.
Standard review.
yeah, so, but I mean, I think, as you recognize, and may have been said in the last meeting, that this would probably be very difficult to get approved, and today we would be very concerned about this, but I think my understanding is that the plans that you submitted are, at least in a slight way, improving the current situation. And based on that, it would seem to me to be reasonable to consider approval. Maybe Mr. Palmer can lead us through his evaluation of the application.
I think what you said is entirely accurate. It's a slight improvement on what is there now. The engineer can tell you, or show on the plan, that it's 33% now, and it's going down to 29%. It's a very small increase. The owners should really know that you shouldn't have very high expectations that what's going to happen here is going to resolve anything to any great extent. And it is a huge financial, I'm not sure how much you're going to spend on this, but it seems like it's going to be a significant amount of money for more, seems to be, to my mind, more landscaping than driveway improvement. There is a snow shelf that's going to go in front of there, in front of the landscaping that will help the snow conditions, but it's an improvement. How small it may be, it is an improvement. So, and as mentioned earlier, it was approved by the village, so we're limited with our alternatives and what we can do. This is where we are. So.
There is an encroachment in the right of way though, to do this, right?
Yes.
Is that a new encroachment or just a continuation of an encroachment?
The retaining walls are new.
That's-
The driveway always was a curb cut,
Yeah.
but now they're bringing retaining walls to lower the grade and move it and shift it over, which go into the right of way. So that's under the purview, it would go back to the board of trustees for the final approval.
But it's within the normal, if you look at that street, I've driven down that street many times, and
The curb cuts.
There's similar
there's similar walls, so
intrusions.
there's nothing unusual about it, at least would be my view.
I asked the engineer when he first proposed this to keep the first retaining wall 5 feet back from the curb, and he did so, which is an improvement for the village to give walking space and snow plowing area.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm a little confused, it says continuation of application, is this continuation of public hearing?
The public hearing was closed, but if you want to reopen it.
It was closed, okay, that's what thank you.
That's my recollection.
Open the lid.
Well, we're accepting your documents as part of the record.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Any questions or comments by the board?
No, I think this is an improvement. I don't see anything getting worse. I'm more disappointed.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Do I understand we have a resolution available this evening?
We do it, and we talked about it earlier, maybe the attorney should read that resolution, because we did add some language in there, since it's not meeting a standard to indemnify, hold harmless, so maybe Darius can speak to that further.
Do you want me to read the proposed resolution, Mr. Chair? Sure. Village adopts, none of Javier's not here today. Village adopts, planning board resolution granted site plan approval for the construction of a retaining wall to support a relocated driveway together with other related site and drainage work at 189 Northfield Avenue. Whereas Lauren Wendt, owner, has applied for site plan approval to construct a retaining wall and relocated driveway on a portion of which will be located within the village right of way. and make related site improvements at 189 Northfield Avenue. Whereas the following plans and documents were submitted, including Mr. Bratinsky's 1029 letter. Whereas the planning board is familiar with the site and the proposed improvement plans at the meeting on November 1st held a public hearing, and all comments were considered. Are there any comments from the public? None? Whereas the planning board has reviewed the staff report prepared by Han Engineering dated November 1st. Whereas the proposed action is a type 2 action under SEQR and is therefore exempt from environmental review. Therefore, be it resolved, the planning board of the village of Dobbs Ferry hearing grants site plan approval for the subject application to take effect and the condition on the following. The applicant shall seek approval for the board of trustees of the village of Dobbs Ferry to construct and maintain certain improvements within the village right of way. Failure to obtain said approval shall make this site plan approval null and void. The applicant shall also comply with all indemnification, hold harmless, and insurance requirements of the Board of Trustees relative to the proposed construction within the right-of-way. The Board of Trustees will require all that, a license agreement to be executed, and all those requirements on a yearly basis to notify the village in writing.
Understood.
All applicable provisions of the village, county, and state regulations shall be met, and a site landscape plan shall be provided for review and approval by the village's consulting planner. The proposed retaining wall shall be subject to review and approval of the Village of Dobbs Ferry Architectural and Historic Review Board. Prior to issuance of a building permit, all required site plan and engineering fees shall be paid, and all requirements of the village's engineer's memo shall be addressed to his satisfaction. The following language shall be added to the plan, approved subject to the requirements and conditions of the resolution of the planning board dated November 1st. Any erasure, change, or modification of this approval will require reapproval of the planning board, and if it's not, shall be null and void. That's the proposed motion.
I would make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Next item on our agenda, item number 4, 292 Palisade Avenue, public hearing for site plan approval for proposed addition and renovation on site improvements.
Members of the board. My name is Dan Collins from Hudson Engineering, the engineers for the project. Since our last meeting, we did add a couple of dimensions on the corner of the property. There was a block between the shed and the property line just to show that we are compliant with the setbacks. It is 5 feet from the side. I think we have about 7 feet there proposed, and we're about 12 feet from the rear, and it's 5 feet from the rear is what's required. The remainder of the plans stayed exactly the same as they were at the prior meeting. We did bring in a picture of the shed that was proposed along the side as well. This is what that's going to look like. It's obviously a standard wood utility shed with wood storage for fireplace on the left side, and on the right side is garden equipment storage, lawnmowers, etc. I mean, it's really it's an 8 by 16, I believe, and I believe it only gets as high as 8 feet to maybe 9 feet at its highest point. So it's within compliance with the village.
Where is it on the plan? Could you point to where that structure
Yes.
is?
It is right here, in that area. So that's where they are. Our plan is going to level this area out, flatten it for a little bit, so they have the vegetable garden and then for the shed, for the utilities, the tools.
How close is the house that is to the left of the?
How close is the house? The existing
No,
house?
the neighbor's house.
Oh, honestly, I do not know.
There are about 25-foot hedges right in behind where the shed is going.
And then I would give it another 30 feet to the house.
It's hard, how is this?
Who is that?
Where's the main road, where's your drive, I'm just trying to see, this right there.
Sorry, let me zoom in. Palisade Avenue's down here, the driveway's up along the side here.
Okay.
The main house and the garage in the back with
The house next to you on the left is the long, low house. So there's a lot of room.
There's a lot of room between houses, yes. It's
Yeah.
the house on the other side that's really close to me. The blue house is super close.
Yeah, I understand, thank you.
I could give a synopsis for anybody who's here who wants to speak. I mean, I'm not sure if there's anybody in the public that has any comments.
This is a public hearing, is there anyone here that wishes to speak on this? Okay.
But if that's the case, I was hoping to close the public hearing. But we did receive the comment letter. I did get it forwarded. I got a hard copy here too. The comments are all straightforward. We've worked with Hans Engineer before, so hopefully if we can approve this tonight and move forward, then we'll be awesome.
Moving in that direction. Any comments or questions?
What's the rest of the scope of the project?
The remainder is the patio area. There's a existing patio back. They're expanding the patio area, putting a new walkway in that links to the front covered porch. This porch is actually being redone. It's not a proposed porch, it's already there. So really it's being redone, linking walkway to the back, expansion of the existing patio in the back, and then new retaining walls, about 3 feet high. To at one point, I think we are about 4 feet here. Then decorative steps up to the existing play area, which is just gonna be remulched. It's gonna remain as is.
And right now, there's no existing back patio. There's no back patio at all. It's
If-
just level area.
If you give us a microphone.
Just to clarify, there's no back patio at this time. You just walk out to the flattened gravel area.
Could you state your name also, please?
Christina Cohen, owner.
Anyone have any other questions?